go. And I will now pass it off to my colleague, Cassandra.
Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here for the Air Toxics Regulations Rulemaking information session. I'm Cassandra Meyer, and I am the technical staff lead assigned to this rulemaking effort. And while we're not in the formal request for comment period, we are still in the beginning stages, and we would like your input and feedback as we work on the air toxics regulations rules. And that's why we're here, to encourage your involvement. And as another reminder, as Hannah said, this presentation is being recorded. So if you joined us for the presentation in December, welcome back. And also we've added a little more context in the presentation for today. So first we'll go through a few definitions of terms that will be mentioned, and we'll provide a little background on why we're working on these rules now. Then I will provide a brief overview of what the MPCA has been directed to do for air toxics regulations, including a summary of the statute, how to stay informed, where we're at in the rulemaking process. And my colleague, Megan Kolstenis, will then go over the separate but related air toxics reporting rulemaking process. In case there's feedback you all can provide around that role as well. Then we'll go through questions on specific items that we at MPCA would like your input around. And we just really want to encourage your involvement in this rulemaking process. So a few terms that are used in this presentation are included here. There's a lot of text, so I will read through what's written for each definition. Rulemaking is the process used by government agencies to create, modify, or repeal rules and regulations. These rules and regulations are a form of administrative law that governs the conduct of individuals, businesses, and other entities within the jurisdiction of the relevant government agency. And in this case, it's the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And we are going through the rulemaking process for air toxics. And air toxics are pollutants that are known or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects or adverse environmental effects. And there are a specific set of air toxics known as our next definition, which is hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs. And these are 188 air toxics defined in the Clean Air Act. In our list of questions that we'll get to at the end of this presentation that we're seeking feedback on, we mention health risk values. And a health risk value is also known as an air guidance value. These are concentrations of a chemical that is likely to pose little or no risk to human health. These values are used in analyses to determine human health risks from exposure to chemicals in the air. And then lastly, we have criteria pollutants. And these are 6 commonly found air pollutants that have ambient air standards as required in the Clean Air Act. That includes carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulates, which is also referred to as PM10 and PM2.5, sulfur and sulfur dioxide. And there's an asterisk by lead because lead is also an air toxic. For some context of where we do our, as a little more context around air toxics and what they are, we have some examples on this slide. And that includes that air toxics can include metals, dioxins, furans, benzene, PFAS, or forever chemicals, TCE, and others. Impacts from air toxics can include cancer, but that depends on the pollutant. Not all air toxics cause cancer. Respiratory issues, cardiovascular issues, and other health effects. And some sources of air toxics includes combustion, wildfires, transportation, solvents, and other sources. For some context of where we do have authority on those 188 hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs, this comes from, as I mentioned earlier, the Clean Air Act. And so here we have just a very high-level overview of some aspects of the Clean Air Act, but this is not exhaustive. So it was enacted or established in 1970, and it provides the authority on the federal level to regulate air pollution. The Clean Air Act largely regulates 6 pollutants known as the criteria pollutants, and it also provided authority to establish national standards for hazardous air pollutants, or NESHAPs. In 1990, there were amendments to the Act. This established the list of then 189 HAPs and the authority to regulate them. EPA was also directed to adopt air toxics control standards, where they had to identify industrial sources emitting HAPs, identify maximum achievable control technologies, or MACTs, and they had to conduct risk assessments afterwards to ensure that the standards were protective. And today, this list of hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs, is 188 pollutants, and that has changed a little over time. And so the graph on the right is from EPA, and it shows the trend of those 6 criteria pollutants going down over time and the gross domestic product going up, which implies that controlling and decreasing pollution can occur while also the GDP, which is a measure of economic health, goes up. So we have some authority on the federal level to regulate HAPs. Why are we doing this rulemaking now for air toxics on the state level? And so MPCA implements federal air toxics regulations, and it's important to know that these are the minimum that regulated facilities must meet. The Clean Air Act doesn't limit states' authority to regulate air pollution, and states can have more stringent or more environmentally protective laws and requirements. And there are geographic and economic differences in every state, and states will look at local needs to create more rules. And that is what the legislature in Minnesota did. The legislature found that there was a need in Minnesota to have state air toxics rules, and so they directed us to do rulemaking. This is the first rulemaking of its kind for Minnesota, where we are directed to regulate a breadth of air toxics. MPCA has voluntary efforts around air toxics working towards reducing pollution, but again, they're voluntary, and those are voluntary on behalf of that the facility would take. And since the federal regulations do not necessarily cover every pollutant, it's just those 188 air toxics, these state rules will hopefully improve air quality in the metro area, which is where the rules will apply. So again, the most simple answer to this question of why we're doing this now is that we were directed by the legislature. And so moving forward with this direction we've been given, what were we told to address? And so here we have an overview of some of the details in the statute that directs us to do this work. And the statute requires that the commissioner adopt rules to implement and govern the regulation of facilities that emit air toxics. There were some restrictions laid out for us, and those are on the left side of the slide here. And they include that we are on a 3-year timeline. We have to get our draft rules on notice of intent to adopt by May 18th, 2026. And we are still at the beginning of this process. The rules will only be applicable in the 7 counties of the metro area. They are not limited to only environmental justice areas. They will apply to everywhere within the 7 counties that are listed here. They will not apply to facilities with registration option B permits. And if you're not familiar, registration option B permits are for sources that purchase or use less than 2,000 gallons of VOC containing materials on a calendar year basis. And in the metro area, these are largely auto body repair shops. And on the right side of the slide, these are the things that we are directed in the statute to address at a minimum. So it set the floor for our efforts and not the ceiling. And this includes that we have to address specific air toxics, types of facilities, performance tests, monitoring of emissions, reporting requirements, record keeping, inspection frequency, and our rules must reflect the risk to human health and the environment, a facility's compliance record, and residents' exposure in environmental justice areas. And as a preview for what we're asking specifically for, one of the questions is about this last point, where the rules must reflect residents' exposure in environmental justice areas. In order to stay the most up-to-date and informed, we are encouraging you to sign up for our email list if you haven't already. We will send out all of the notices concerning this rulemaking through that email list. You can sign up to that list through our air toxics rulemaking webpage. And that link is here at the bottom of the screen. And it looks like it's also dropped in the chat. Thank you, Hannah. And you could also use your smartphone if you have one, and the QR code on the slide, and it will direct you to the same webpage. On the right side, you can see a screenshot of what that webpage looks like. And then you would scroll to the bottom where they're in the gray callout box is the sign up for the email list. In addition to the option to sign up for the email, we have a lot more information there, including links to the statute language that directs this work, the comments that we received during the formal request for comments period, and our contact information is there for myself, Cassandra Meyer, and the rule coordinator, Yolanda Litness. There's also the recording of the information session that we had in December, if you were wanting to see that played back. So please check that webpage and sign up for the email list. You can see here the timeline for this rulemaking. We're just past the formal request for comments period, but we're still early in the development phase of the process. And at this point, we're looking to other states for examples and determining how we're going to weigh different options. And even though we're past that formal request for comments period, we're still seeking specific feedback and guidance from the public, which is why we're having this meeting now. And we really want to hear from people who will be impacted by these rules. And now my colleague, Megan Kulstenis, will walk us through the separate but related air toxics reporting rulemaking process and what's involved in that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I am the project manager or the project lead for the air toxics emissions reporting rulemaking. And that is on a little bit different of a timeline, but the way we have air toxics reporting currently in Minnesota, it is voluntary and every 3 years. And so we were also told by the legislature to do air toxics reporting rulemaking, where we would have annual reporting for all facilities emitting air toxics in the 7-county metro area. Again, this would not include registration option B facilities for the reporting rulemaking either. But the legislature charged us with making sure we have that list of chemicals that would need to be reported annually, methods for emissions measurement and estimation of those values. And then, using 5 lists that we would pull from. They are the HAP list that Cassandra talked about, the hazardous air pollutants outlined in the Clean Air Act. The TRI list, the toxic release inventory, which is also outlined as a federal list, also outlined partially in at least federal rule. And then the Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS. And so these are 3 federal lists that we have the ability to pull from for our chosen list of chemicals to be reported in Minnesota. And then we have 2 additional state lists. What's listed in here is the MDH values. Those are the MDH health-based values or risk assessment advice, or the air guidance values, like Cassandra mentioned before. And our MPCA's most recent emissions inventory list that we had been doing for voluntary reporting, we can pull from that as well. So we're working to determine if which chemicals from all of these lists and what would be the criteria to add or remove air toxics from the list in the future. And all of that would be outlined in the air toxics reporting rulemaking. And that one, we are on a much shorter timeline. We have to have the notice of intent to adopt by November 26th of this year of 2024. So we understand there might be folks very curious about this, and we are looking to have an info session probably in late April, early May. That's what we call spring. That's what we're thinking of as spring. We know it can probably feel kind of spring-like right now, but we are working diligently to get that rule, kind of have it an idea and fleshed out. And so at that info session, we would have kind of an initial idea of what we're looking at kind of before we're on that notice of intent to adopt, so that we can kind of hear feedback about how doable that would be, or gather additional information about impacts that people, that facilities especially, may have. So please look forward. If you're interested in that, you can also go to the air toxics emissions reporting rule page. I believe you could, if you went to the regulations page, you could navigate to it on the left-hand side. You're welcome to sign up for the reporting information as well. We would send out a reminder of that spring webinar when we are ready to share that as well. So right now I will turn it back over to Cassandra, but please feel free. I know there are a few other reporting questions within the feedback, so we're anxious to hear from folks as well.
Thanks, Megan. So in terms of what we would like your feedback on, we have a list of questions, and you are welcome and encouraged to provide feedback on any part of the rulemaking process. But we have specific questions that we'd like to hear from you on. And so those are listed here. So according to the statute, the rules must account for any exposure of residents in environmental justice areas to facilities' air toxic emissions. How do you recommend accomplishing this? What approach would be most effective to regulate air toxics in Minnesota? Some examples include by type of industry, amount of individual pollutants, risk posed by different pollutants, a type of air permit that's held by a facility, or proximity to residential areas, or some other approach that you might think about and recommend. And if you have experience with air toxics rules in other states and have insight into what has worked well or not worked well for implementation, please let us know about that too. Should the MPCA limit or regulate air toxics where there are no health risk values established, such as with PFAS? How can the MPCA make determining compliance as simple for regulated parties as possible? Should there be a phase-in period for newly regulated parties and new reporters? Are there sources that should be exempt from air toxics rules? And if so, what criteria should determine this? And again, some examples of that could be by type of industry, the amount of individual pollutants, the risk posed by pollutants, the type of air permit held, or proximity to residential areas, or some other criteria that you would recommend. And what organizations, industry groups, etc., should we notify when this rule is on notice? And please provide their contact information. And we do have a couple questions related to the reporting rulemaking as well. And those include, how can we make reporting as simple for regulated parties as possible? Should there be a phase-in period for reporting? And do you have suggestions for how we establish a process to reevaluate the list of air toxics? All of these questions are listed individually on our Smart Comment page, so you can reply to all of the questions or just some of them. And there is space as well to provide open feedback about anything else that you would want to comment on outside of the questions that we've listed. And our Smart Comment page, you can get to from this link here. So we encourage you to provide your feedback through this webpage. We can drop a link to this chat or a link to this page in the chat as well, or you can use the QR code to navigate there. This page will be open through March 8th. And if you attended the December meeting, we extended the original date that we had said we would have this open till because of the timing of this session. So we encourage you to provide written feedback through the Smart Comment page, but we can also take your feedback now through the chat or verbally if you want to raise your hand using that function in Zoom. And then on the right side of the slide, there is a screenshot of what the Smart Comment page looks like. You would provide your contact information at the top, and then at the bottom, you can scroll through the individual questions. And there's also an option to upload documents if you want to provide comments that way. So thank you all for joining us today. We have our contact information for the 2 air toxics rules here, myself, Cassandra Meyer, for air toxics regulations rulemaking, and my colleague, Megan Coles-Dennis, for air toxics reporting rulemaking. And again, thank you all for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Hannah to help facilitate taking any feedback that may come through now.
Great. Thanks, Cassandra, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We do have one question in the chat that we'll start with, and then if you would like to raise your hand, please do so, or feel free to just type it in. So the first question we have, are you looking at different ways to set the levels? What are the choices?
We are looking at different ways to potentially set levels, but we haven't decided on anything yet. And this is something that we are looking for feedback on. So please go to the Smart Comment page and provide that feedback.
I'll just keep an eye on the chat here, give it a couple minutes.
So I see Evan's comment again about it being hard to comment without knowing what kind of regulatory choices there are. And so we do have, I kind of highlighted some of the ways that we're seeing different levels in other states outlined. And so we have those listed also on the Smart Comment page. But again, I could say like some of them are by type of industry. amount of pollutants emitted by an individual facility, the risk posed by those pollutants. There's different requirements by type of air permit that's held. So there's different ways that other states have done it.
We'll just give it a little bit more time here. I know sometimes you have to kind of take in the information for a minute before getting your question. Looks like we have another one here in the chat. Are VOCs and pollution from industries such as laundromats, vent emissions taken into account?
So I'll say that we haven't decided anything yet. So that is a potential possibility, but everything is to be determined. We're at the very beginning of this process and deciding what it is we would like to see. So if that is something that you would want to see, please let us know. You can either say that yes, you want to see that, or no, you don't, now, or on the Smart Comment page.
And I think it is good too to just take note of the contact information here on the screen. We try and, be as accessible as possible for questions outside of just the Smart Comment page too. And as a reminder too, this is being recorded, and we will be posting this video on YouTube afterwards on the MPCA YouTube channel. So you can refer back to this if maybe that helps as filling out the Smart Comment, or you just want to share this with anyone. I think if there is any news on here as well, we can get you a copy of the recording, and certainly take some time to do any follow-up tomorrow and the rest of this week. So I'll just give it another second here. And it looks like we are getting more comments in. Thanks, Amanda, for confirming a little bit more about that question. Thanks.
And I'll add a note too, that if they don't have an air permit, they, depending on how the rules are set up, if they're not required to get an air permit, then these rules likely may not apply to them too.
All right, I will do a last call for any other questions. I want to make sure if anyone is typing, I don't want to cut it off. But with that being said, thanks everyone for making the time tonight. And we will be planning again for that reporting information session later this spring, so you can watch for that and stay up to date with all of our latest updates through that email sign-up list, and certainly reach out if anything else comes up. But I will go ahead and end the recording and end the Zoom. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us tonight.